There are some wounds that never show on the surface, the kind that live deep in your chest, wrapped around your heart like barbed wire, squeezing a little tighter every time you dare to hope. Maggie knew that feeling well. At 29 years old, she'd built what most people would call a good life. Stable job as a senior bookkeeper, modest apartment, reliable car, money in savings. But here's the thing about Maggie's life. It was immaculate, organized, and completely, achingly empty. Every Sunday evening, she'd sit at her small kitchen table with a frozen dinner, staring out the window at the family across the street. She'd watch them laugh over homemade meals, watch the kids run around, watch the parents hold hands, and she'd feel that familiar hollow ache spreading through her chest. The one that whispered, "You'll never have that, you were never meant for that." Then she'd close the blinds, finish her tasteless meal, and remind herself that she was fine. That needing people was weakness, that she'd made it this far alone, hadn't she? But surviving isn't the same as living, and deep down, in the parts of herself she refused to acknowledge, Maggie was dying of loneliness. She attended St. Patrick's Catholic Church every Sunday, but she'd perfected the art of being invisible, arriving 5 minutes late, slipping into the back pew, leaving before the final hymn ended. No coffee hour, no small talk, no connections, just her and God, and even then, she wasn't sure he saw her either. The prayers were comforting, the rituals familiar, but Maggie had learned long ago not to ask for too much. Not from God, not from anyone. Because here's what 29 years had taught her. People leave. People forget. People choose others. Never you. Let me take you back to where it all started. To the beginning of a story that would break your heart before it ever had the chance to heal it. Maggie was born in 1966 to a 16-year-old girl who wasn't ready to be a mother. There was no dramatic tragedy, no devastating backstory, just a scared teenager who looked at her newborn baby and knew she couldn't do it. So she left Maggie at St. Mary's Home for Children, a Catholic orphanage run by nuns in upstate New York, with nothing but a birth certificate and a note that read, "Please take care of her, I can't." 4 words that would define Maggie's entire existence. I can't. Translation, you're too much. You're not worth the effort. You're disposable. Maggie spent her first 6 years at that orphanage with 40 other children in one building, sleeping 4 girls to a room in donated nightgowns, eating institutional meals at long tables, living by rigid schedules. Wake at 6, prayers, breakfast, school, chores, bed at 7. The nuns weren't cruel, but they weren't warm either. How could they be? 40 children, 2 tired women trying to keep everyone fed and clothed and alive. There was no room for tenderness, no space for individual love. Maggie learned early, don't make waves, don't ask for too much, don't expect anyone to remember your name. But even in that sea of forgotten children, Maggie held on to one fragile thread of hope: Adoption Day. Every few months, couples would visit St. Mary's, walking slowly down the line, of children who'd been scrubbed clean and dressed in their best donated clothes, looking for the one. Maggie would stand there, month after month, watching the babies get chosen first because everyone wants babies, then the pretty blonde girls with curls, then the quiet, well-behaved ones who smiled on command. And month after month, Maggie was passed over. Too plain, too quiet, too old, even at 5, even at 6, until finally, when she was 6 years old, a couple stopped in front of her. Harold and Ruth Miller, late 40s, childless, and they chose her. Not because she was special, but because, as Ruth Miller would later say, she was old enough to be helpful around the house. That should have been Maggie's first warning. The Millers weren't cruel, let me be clear about that. They fed her, clothed her, sent her to school. But they also made it very clear what her role was: useful. Maggie woke at 5:30 every morning to help Ruth prepare breakfast. She cleaned before and after school. She did laundry, ironing, yard work. She learned to move quietly through the house, to speak only when spoken to be grateful for the bed in the small attic room they'd given her. And she tried so desperately hard to earn their love, thinking if I'm useful enough, helpful enough, good enough, maybe they'll want me, maybe they'll keep me, maybe one day they'll let me call them Mom and Dad instead of Mr. and Mrs. Miller. But that day never came. When Maggie was 8 years old, Ruth got sick, cancer, they said, and suddenly Harold Miller had a choice to make: care for his dying wife or care for the foster child he'd taken in as free labor. The choice was easy. The social worker came on a Tuesday afternoon. Maggie cried and promised to be better, to help more, to be no trouble at all. It didn't matter. She was sent back to St. Mary's with the same truth burning in her chest that would follow her for decades. If you're not useful, you're disposable. But the Millers were just the beginning. Maggie's childhood became a revolving door of rejection, each foster home teaching her a new lesson in unworthiness. The Johnsons, a Southern Baptist family with 3 biological sons, took her in as their Christian duty to help the less fortunate. For 3 years, Maggie lived in that house as the charity case, watching the sons get new clothes while she wore church donations, watching them get birthday parties, while she shared a cake with whoever's birthday was closest to hers, listening as they introduced their sons by name but called her the foster child we're helping. And when their youngest son broke a lamp and blamed Maggie, Mrs. Johnson believed him without question. Your word doesn't matter when you're dispensable. Maggie was 11 when they sent her away for being defiant and ungrateful. Then came the collective farm, a converted group home for 12 foster girls where Mr. and Mrs. Peterson collected monthly stipends and treated the children like cheap labor. Garden, cook, clean, repeat. Education was secondary. Individual attention was non-existent. Maggie learned to make herself invisible, to do her work and cause no trouble, to build walls so high around her heart that nothing could get in and nothing could get out. Don't get attached. Everyone leaves eventually. At 13, a retired teacher named Mr. Henderson and his librarian wife took Maggie in because a social worker noticed she was reading at a college level. For the first time, someone valued her mind. The Hendersons had a house full of books, helped her apply to a good high school, talked about college possibilities. But they were academics, not nurturers. They provided intellectual stimulation but no emotional warmth, no hugs, no I love you, no celebration of who Maggie was as a person. She was a project, not a daughter. And when they decided to retire to Florida at Maggie's 16th birthday, they couldn't take her. People will invest in your potential but not in you. Maggie's final 2 years in foster care were spent in a transition home, learning life skills, how to balance a checkbook, apply for jobs, find an apartment. And on her 18th birthday in 1984, Maggie aged out of the system with a garbage bag of belongings, $200 from the state, a list of resources for homeless youth, and a handshake from her social worker. No family to call. No home to return to for holidays. No safety net. Just Maggie, alone, with the unshakable belief that she would always be alone. And for 11 years she was. She worked 3 jobs to put herself through community college, lived in boarding houses and studio apartments, climbed her way to financial stability through sheer determination. By 29, she had everything she'd worked for, and nothing she'd ever wanted. Which brings us back to that Sunday in 1995, when everything changed. Father Murphy stood at the pulpit after Mass and made an announcement. The church needed volunteers to repair and paint the parish hall. If anyone had construction or painting skills, they'd be grateful for the help. Maggie sat in her usual back pew, ready to slip out unnoticed like always. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the echo of the Johnsons' voice in her head about Christian duty. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the desperate hope that if she could just be useful to someone, somewhere, she might matter. So, for the first time in 3 years of attending St. Patrick's, Maggie stayed. She signed up to volunteer. And that single decision, that one moment of choosing engagement over isolation, would unravel everything she thought she knew about her worth. But here's what Maggie didn't know yet. Across that very same church, in the 3rd pew from the front, surrounded by his entire loud, loving, chaotic family, a 35-year-old contractor named Tom Sullivan had been noticing the quiet woman in the back for months, and he was about to do something that would change both their lives forever. So tell me, when you've spent your whole life believing you're unworthy of love, how do you recognize it when it finally shows up? That Saturday morning, Maggie showed up at St. Patrick's Parish Hall, wearing paint-stained jeans and a guarded expression. The same armor she'd worn her entire life. 20 volunteers milled around with coffee and donuts, laughing and chatting like this was some kind of social event instead of work. Maggie grabbed a paintbrush and looked for the quietest corner to disappear into. But then Father Murphy spotted her, smiled warmly, and said the words that would start. Dismantling the walls she'd spent 29 years building, Maggie, Tom, could use help painting the main hall after he finishes the repairs. And that's when she saw him. Tom Sullivan was on a ladder, repairing crown molding, sleeves rolled up, tool belt around his waist, completely focused on his work. When Father Murphy called his name, he looked down and smiled. Not the polite smile strangers give each other, but something warmer, something genuine. "Nice to meet you," he said, climbing down. "I'm Tom Sullivan." His handshake was firm, his eyes kind, and Maggie felt something dangerous flicker in her chest. Hope. She crushed it immediately. "Margaret," she replied. "People call me Maggie." Tom nodded. "Well, Maggie, I appreciate the help. Should be ready for paint in about an hour." And then he did something that caught her off guard. He meant it. Most people said thank you as a formality, but Tom looked at her like her presence actually mattered. For the next hour, Maggie watched Tom work from a safe distance. He was methodical, skilled, talking easily with the other volunteers who clearly knew and respected him. She noticed things, the way he didn't complain when someone asked him to fix something else, the way he thanked people by name, the way he seemed completely comfortable in his own skin. It was foreign to her, this ease with belonging. When the repairs were done, they started painting side by side. Tom made conversation while they worked, his voice easy and unhurried. "You've been coming to St. Patrick's for a while, haven't you? I've seen you at Mass." Maggie's defenses went up instantly. "About 3 years. Short, non-committal. Don't give him anything to work with." But Tom didn't push. "You new to the area?" he asked, dipping his roller in paint. "Relatively. I moved here for work." Tom glanced at her. "Where'd you move from?" And there it was, the question that always came, the one that led to more questions, the one that eventually revealed she had no family, no history, no connections. "Upstate," Maggie said flatly, her tone making it clear the subject was closed. Here's what most people would have done, pushed harder, gotten offended, or made some comment about her being cold. But Tom Sullivan just nodded and said, "Fair enough," and kept painting. They worked in companionable silence after that, and Maggie felt herself relax incrementally. Maybe he wouldn't pry. Maybe this would just be a few hours of work and then she could disappear again. But then Mary Sullivan showed up. She swept into the parish hall like a force of nature, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair, warm eyes, and an armful of Tupperware containers. "I brought cookies for the volunteers," she announced to the room, and immediately people flocked to her like she was everyone's favorite grandmother. Tom set down his paint roller and smiled. "Mom, this is Maggie." "Maggie, this is my mother, Mary Sullivan." Mary's face lit up. "Lovely to meet you, dear. Would you like a cookie? I made them fresh this morning." Before Maggie could politely decline, Mary had pressed 2 chocolate chip cookies into her hands. "Are you joining us for the potluck lunch after we finish?" Mary asked, already moving on to the next group. "Oh, I didn't." "Bring anything to share," Maggie started, but Mary waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. There's always plenty. You come sit with us when you're done." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Maggie standing there with cookies and a sinking feeling that she'd just been adopted whether she wanted to be or not. Tom chuckled softly. "She's a lot, I know. My mom doesn't really take no for an answer when it comes to feeding people." Maggie looked at the cookies in her hands, homemade, still warm, the kind of thing mothers do when they care. When was the last time someone had made something just for her? Never. The answer was never. "You don't have to come to lunch if you don't want to," Tom added gently, and Maggie realized he'd seen the panic in her eyes. But here's the thing about kindness when you're not used to it. It's terrifying and irresistible at the same time. When the painting was done and the potluck lunch began, Maggie stood at the edge of the parish hall, debating whether to slip out the side door. But then Mary spotted her. "Maggie, come sit with us, dear." And somehow Maggie found herself seated at a table with Tom, his parents Frank and Mary, his sister Bridget and her husband, and their 3 kids who were running circles around the room. The Sullivan table was chaos incarnate, multiple conversations happening simultaneously, people talking over each other, kids interrupting, laughter erupting, food being passed family style. Maggie sat frozen, fork in hand, watching this family like an anthropologist studying an alien species. This was what family looked like. This loud, messy, beautiful thing. Frank Sullivan, a gruff man in his 60s with calloused hands and kind eyes, asked Tom about a construction job. Mary made sure everyone had enough to eat, piling food on plates like it was her personal mission to prevent starvation. Bridget's children spilled juice, and instead of anger, there was just laughter and paper towels. And through it all, Maggie felt like an outsider looking through glass at something she'd never be part of. Then Mary turned to her. "So, Maggie, Tom mentioned you work in accounting." The table quieted slightly, everyone's attention shifting to her, and Maggie's throat tightened. "Yes, I'm a bookkeeper at a small firm downtown." Bridget smiled. "Do you enjoy it?" What a simple question. What a loaded answer. Maggie chose the safe response. "It's steady work. I'm grateful for it." Mary's eyes softened, and Maggie had the unsettling feeling this woman could see right through her carefully constructed walls. "And do you have family in the area, dear?" The question hung in the air, like a grenade with the pin pulled. Maggie felt everyone's eyes on her, not unkind, just curious, just making conversation, but suddenly she couldn't breathe. Her entire history of rejection, of being unwanted, of not belonging, rose up in her throat and threatened to choke her. "No," she said quietly. "No family." The words fell flat, final, and in the silence that followed, Maggie felt exposed in a way she hadn't felt in years. Mary's hand reached across the table and squeezed hers gently. "Well, you're always welcome at our table, dear. Consider us your honorary family." And that's when Maggie broke. She mumbled an excuse about the bathroom and fled, locking herself in a stall while tears streamed down her face. "Consider us your honorary family." Those words shouldn't hurt. They were kind words, generous words, but they cut Maggie to the bone because she'd heard versions of them before. Temporary kindness from people who meant well but never stayed. The Millers had welcomed her until she wasn't useful. The Johnsons had called her family until she became inconvenient. How many times had she been someone's charity case, their good deed, their "we're helping a less fortunate child" project? She couldn't do this again. She couldn't let herself hope again. But when Maggie returned to the table, red-eyed and fragile, no one mentioned her tears. Mary just smiled and asked if she wanted seconds. Tom quietly slid a napkin closer to her. And for reasons Maggie couldn't explain, she stayed. Over the following months, something shifted. Tom started showing up in her life in small, persistent ways that Maggie didn't know how to stop. One Sunday after Mass, as Maggie headed for the parking lot like always, Tom called out, "Maggie, heading out already?" She turned, surprised he'd noticed. "Yes, I have errands. At least grab some coffee first," Tom said, gesturing toward the parish hall. Father Murphy just made a fresh pot. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even really a request. Just an invitation, no pressure, offered with that same easy warmth that seemed to define everything Tom did. And somehow Maggie found herself standing in the parish hall with weak church coffee in a styrofoam cup, making small talk with Tom Sullivan about nothing important and everything important. They talked about the weather, about work, about the Red Sox season, surface things, safe things. But underneath, Maggie felt something dangerous happening. She was starting to enjoy his company. The second incident came 2 weeks later, when Maggie's kitchen faucet broke on a Saturday. Water sprayed everywhere, soaking her floor, and Maggie had no idea how to fix it. She couldn't afford a plumber. Not really, not with her carefully budgeted life. So she mentioned it casually to Father Murphy after confession, asking if he knew any affordable handyman. She didn't think anything of it, until Tom showed up at her apartment the next evening with a toolbox. "Father Murphy mentioned you have a plumbing issue," he said when Maggie opened the door, confusion written all over her face. "Oh, he didn't need to bother you," she started, but Tom was already stepping inside, scanning the kitchen for the problem. "It's no bother. I can take a look. Probably a simple fix." Maggie's stomach knotted. "I can pay you." Tom looked at her like she'd said something absurd. "Don't worry about it. Part of being a good neighbor. Being a good neighbor." The phrase rattled around in Maggie's head while Tom fixed her faucet in 20 minutes flat. She watched him work, efficient, skilled, whistling softly under his breath, and tried to understand what he wanted from her. Because people didn't just help for free. There was always a cost, always an expectation. When he finished and packed up his tools, Maggie tried again. "Let me at least pay you for your time." Tom shook his head. "Maggie, it's fine. Honestly, I'm happy to help." And that's when she asked the question that had been burning in her chest since the moment they met. "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended. Tom looked confused. "Why what?" Maggie crossed her arms, defensive. "Why are you being so nice to me? You don't even know me." Tom set down his toolbox slowly, and for a long moment he just looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Do I need a reason?" he finally asked. "You needed help. I could help. That's what people do." Maggie's laugh was bitter. "No, it's not. People don't do things without expecting something back." Tom's expression shifted, not to anger but to something sadder, something that looked like understanding. "Maggie," he said gently, "I don't know what happened to you before, but I promise you, I'm not looking for anything except maybe a friend who appreciates good plumbing." The joke fell flat because Maggie was fighting tears. She was 29 years old, standing in her kitchen, confronted with the reality that she literally didn't understand kindness. She'd been conditioned to believe every act of generosity came with strings attached, that help meant debt, that nice people were just waiting for the right moment to remind you what you owed them. Tom must have seen it on her face because his voice softened even more. "I'm not going to hurt you, Maggie. I'm just trying to be kind, that's all. No ulterior motives, no expectations. Just kindness." He picked up his toolbox and headed for the door. "I'll see you at Mass on Sunday." It was a question, not an assumption, giving her the power to say no. Maggie nodded, not trusting her voice. And after Tom left, she sat on her couch and cried for reasons she couldn't fully name. But Tom Sullivan wasn't done showing up. A few weeks later, Mary cornered Maggie after Mass with an invitation that made Maggie. His heart race with panic. "We're having Sunday dinner today at 1 o'clock. The whole family comes. Would you like to join us?" Maggie's mind immediately started generating excuses. "Oh, I couldn't impose on family time." Mary's eyes twinkled. "Nonsense. We always have room for one more. Thomas can pick you up on his way." "Really, I don't want to intrude." Maggie tried again, but Mary's expression turned firm in that particularly maternal way. "Maggie, I'm inviting you. It would make me happy if you came. Please." And there it was, the thing Maggie couldn't fight against. Someone asking her to come not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because they wanted her there. When was the last time anyone had wanted her presence? "Okay," Maggie whispered. "Thank you." Tom picked her up at 12:30. Maggie clutched a store-bought pie like a life preserver, her anxiety written all over her face. "You didn't have to bring anything," Tom said as she climbed into his truck. "I couldn't show up empty-handed," Maggie replied, and Tom smiled that easy smile. "Fair warning, it's going to be loud. There'll be about 20 people between family and whoever Mom decided to invite this week. 20 people. Maggie's apartment could barely fit 5 comfortably. Maybe this was a bad idea. She started, reaching for the door handle, but Tom gently touched her arm. "Hey, it'll be fine. And if you get overwhelmed, just give me a signal, and I'll make an excuse for us to step outside." The fact that he understood she might need an escape route made Maggie's chest ache. "Okay," she said quietly. The Sullivan house was a modest 2-story in a working-class neighborhood, with a big front porch and a yard scattered with toys. When Tom opened the front door, Maggie was hit with a wall of noise, kids shrieking, adults laughing, football game on the TV, the smell of roast beef and potatoes. She froze in the doorway, completely overwhelmed. This was a mistake. This was too much. She didn't belong here. But before she could flee, Mary appeared like she'd been waiting. "Maggie, you came. Come in, come in. Let me take that pie." Thomas introduced Maggie to everyone. The next 20 minutes were a blur of names and faces. Frank Sullivan, Tom's father, shook her hand with a grip that suggested he'd built things with those hands for 40 years. Patrick, the oldest brother, married with 3 kids. Kathleen, warm and talkative. Bridget, who Maggie had met at the potluck. Sean, a firefighter with his wife and baby. Maureen, engaged and bubbly. Timothy, newly married and proud of it, plus spouses, children, a few family friends, and suddenly Maggie was standing in a house with 23 people who all seemed to know each other's stories, each other's jokes, each other's place in the family ecosystem. And she was the outsider. Dinner was served at 3 connected tables, 1 proper dining table, 2 folding card tables, with barely enough room for everyone. Maggie ended up squeezed between Tom and Kathleen at the main table, feeling like an imposter. Before anyone touched their food, Frank Sullivan stood and cleared his throat. "Let's say grace." Everyone stood, joined hands around the tables, creating an unbroken chain of family. Tom took Maggie's hand on one side, Kathleen took her other hand, and Maggie felt something crack inside her chest. When was the last time someone had held her hand? When was the last time she'd been part of something bigger than herself? Frank's prayer was long, traditional, thanking God for family, for food, for health, for blessings. And at the end he added, "And Lord, we thank you for new friends who join our table. May they always feel welcome in our home." Everyone said amen in unison, and Maggie blinked back tears. The meal itself was chaos. Conversations overlapped. Kids spilled things. Adults teased each other mercilessly. Food was passed family style, everyone helping themselves, reaching. Across the table, saying, "Try this, and you have to taste that." Maggie sat quietly, eating her food, feeling like she was watching a movie about what family was supposed to be. At one point, Mary asked about her job, and Maggie gave the same safe answers she always did. But then Kathleen asked, "Do you enjoy it?" And Maggie realized she'd been asked that question twice now by Sullivan, women, and both times they'd actually seemed interested in her answer. "It's steady work," Maggie said carefully. "I'm grateful for it." Mary's eyes sharpened with the perception of someone who'd raised 7 children and could spot emotional evasion from a mile away. "But do you enjoy it, dear?" The question was gentle, but insistent. Maggie swallowed hard. I like numbers. They make sense. They're predictable. Unlike people," she didn't add. "Unlike families who say they want you and then change their minds. Unlike homes that never become home." Mary nodded slowly, and Maggie had the unnerving feeling this woman understood exactly what she wasn't saying. Then came the question Maggie had been dreading. "And do you have family in the area, dear?" The table didn't exactly fall silent, but the conversations around them dimmed. Maggie felt Tom tense slightly beside her, protective somehow. She could lie. She could say they lived far away. She could deflect. But something about Mary Sullivan's warm eyes and the way this entire family had welcomed a stranger into their home made Maggie tell the truth. "No," she said quietly. "No family." The words hung in the air. "I grew up in foster care, never knew my birth parents. Went through 5 different foster homes before I aged out at 18. No adoptions, no family connections, just me." The silence that followed wasn't pitying, it was respectful, acknowledging. Frank Sullivan set down his fork. Mary's hand covered her heart. Tom's hand found Maggie's under the table and squeezed gently. And Maggie felt something inside her shatter because she'd just exposed the most painful part of her history, and instead of judgment or pity or uncomfortable platitudes, these people just held space for her pain. Mary spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. "Well, you're always welcome at our table, dear. Consider us your honorary family." The same words she'd said weeks ago, but this time they landed differently. This time, Maggie was sitting in their home, at their table, holding their son's hand under the tablecloth. This time, it felt less like politeness and more like a promise. Maggie excused herself to the bathroom and cried quietly, trying not to let anyone hear. But when she returned, her eyes red and swollen, no one made her explain. Tom gave her a small, understanding smile. Mary served her an extra-large piece of pie, and the dinner continued, folding Maggie back into the warmth like she'd never left. That first Sunday dinner became a pattern. Tom started picking Maggie up for Mass every week, and afterward they'd drive to his parents' house for the family gathering. At first, Maggie tried to decline occasionally. Surely they didn't actually want her there every single week. But Mary would call her directly. "Maggie Margaret, I've set your place. Thomas will pick you up at 12:30. Not a question, a statement. And slowly, terrifyingly, Maggie started to believe that maybe they actually wanted her there. Small moments started accumulating. Mary would bring Maggie homemade baked goods during the week. "I made too much, dear," even though Maggie suspected Mary had made exactly the right amount and just wanted an excuse to check on her. Tom would show up to fix things in Maggie's apartment that she hadn't even mentioned were broken. Bridget invited her to women's Bible study. Kathleen asked her to babysit, which Maggie recognized as a sign of trust. You don't leave your kids with someone unless you consider them safe, family. And then came Thanksgiving. Maggie had spent every Thanksgiving since aging out of foster care alone, usually with Chinese takeout and a movie, pretending it didn't hurt to see everyone else celebrating family. But 2 weeks before Thanksgiving 1995, Mary called. "Maggie, what time should Thomas pick you up for Thanksgiving dinner?" Maggie's stomach dropped. "Oh, I wasn't planning to come. I don't want to intrude on family." Mary's voice turned firm. "Maggie Margaret, you listen to me. You are family. I've set a place for you. Thomas will pick you up at noon. End of discussion." Maggie tried to argue, but Mary had already hung up. And on Thanksgiving Day, Tom showed up at her apartment at 11:50, grinning. "Mom sent me early, in case you tried to make a run for it." Maggie couldn't help but smile. "Am I that predictable?" Tom's expression softened. "You're that scared." There's a difference. The Sullivan house was packed. 30-plus people crammed into every available space. Extended family, neighbors, friends, anyone who didn't have somewhere else to go. The smell of turkey and stuffing filled the air. Children ran wild. Adults shouted conversations over the noise. And Maggie stood in the middle of it all, terrified and mesmerized. Before dinner, Frank Sullivan gathered everyone in the living room, standing room only. "Before we eat, I want to say something." The room quieted. "We have a lot to be grateful for this year. Health, family, each other." His eyes found Maggie in the crowd. "And we're grateful for new family members, for Maggie, who God brought to us this year. May she always know she has a home here." Tom added to the traditional blessing at the table, "And Lord, we're grateful for new family members. For Maggie, who you brought to us this year. May she always know she has a home here." The entire room, 33 people, said amen in unison. And Maggie cried through the entire prayer, not even trying to hide it anymore. Mary, sitting across from her, reached over and squeezed her hand. Frank nodded at her with approval. Tom's arm went around her shoulders. And for the first time in 29 years, Maggie felt what it meant to belong. But here's the thing about people who've been hurt their whole lives. They don't heal in straight lines. Over the next months, as Tom's courtship became more intentional, as the Sullivan family drew Maggie deeper into their circle, as hope started replacing despair, Maggie's old wounds began to fight back. She started noticing things, the way the Sullivans introduced their biological children versus how they introduced her. "This is our daughter Kathleen" versus "this is Maggie." Were they the same? Was she imagining the difference? She started pulling back slightly, declining some invitations, keeping conversations more surface level, rebuilding the walls that had been crumbling. Tom noticed immediately. One evening after he'd fixed Maggie's bathroom sink, he sat down on her couch instead of leaving like usual. "Maggie, what's wrong?" She kept her eyes on her hands. "Nothing's wrong. You're pulling away," Tom said gently. "I can feel it." "Did someone say something? Did I do something?" "Yes." Maggie wanted to scream. "You made me hope. You made me believe I could have this. And that's the cruelest thing you could have done, because what happens when it ends? What happens when you all realize I'm not actually worth keeping? But she couldn't say any of that. So instead she said, I just don't want to overstay my welcome. Tom's laugh was soft and sad. Maggie, you can't overstay a welcome that's permanent. Permanent. The word hung between them like a promise Maggie didn't know how to believe. How can you say that? She whispered. You barely know me. Tom leaned forward. I know you're kind. I know you're hard-working and honest. I know you've survived things that would break most people. I know you show up when you say you will. I know you're thoughtful and careful with people. He paused. And I know that for some reason you don't believe you're worth loving. But Maggie, you are. You're so worth it. The walls Maggie had been rebuilding cracked again, and she felt tears sliding down her face. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that this is temporary, that one day you'll all wake up and realize I'm not special. I'm not worth the effort, and you'll send me away like everyone else did. Tom reached out and took her hand. Then I guess I'll just have to keep showing up until you believe it. And he did. For 8 months, Tom Sullivan showed up. He called when he said he would. He picked her up for Mass every Sunday. He fixed things in her apartment. He invited her to parish events. He introduced her to his friends. He talked about future plans that included her. He was patient when Maggie panicked and pulled away. He was steady when her trauma responses kicked in and she tried to sabotage the relationship. He was kind when she tested him by being difficult, by cancelling plans, by asking why he bothered, and slowly, terrifyingly, Maggie started to believe him. 8 months after they met, Tom and Maggie were sitting on her apartment steps after he'd fixed her closet door. The evening was warm, the street quiet, and Tom turned to her with an expression that made Maggie's heart race. Maggie, I need to tell you something. Here it comes, Maggie thought. This is where he tells me it's not working. This is where he ends it. I'm in love with you, Tom said simply. I have been for months. Maggie's breath caught. And I'd like to court you properly, with the intention of marriage, if you'll have me. Marriage. The word echoed in Maggie's head like a bell. Tom Sullivan wanted to marry her. This good, steady, kind man wanted to build a life with her. Tom, I don't know if I know how to be in a relationship, Maggie said desperately. I don't know how to be someone's anything. Tom smiled. Then we'll learn together. But Maggie, I need you to know, I'm serious about this. I'm not looking for temporary. I'm looking for forever. And I think you're it for me. Forever. Permanent. Words Maggie had never applied to herself. What if I'm too broken? She whispered, and Tom's hand cupped her face gently. You're not broken. You've been hurt. There's a difference. And I'm patient. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to trust that I'm not going anywhere. Maggie searched his eyes for any sign of doubt, any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was love. Real, steady, patient love. I'm terrified, she admitted. Tom nodded. So am I. But I think you're worth being scared for. He leaned in slowly, giving Maggie every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their first kiss was gentle, sweet, and full of promise. And when they pulled apart, Maggie realized she was crying again. But this time, they were tears of something she hadn't felt in 29 years. Hope. Over the following months, Tom's courtship was old-fashioned and intentional. He asked permission before progressing the relationship. He introduced Maggie to extended family members. He talked about the future openly, where they'd live, how many children they wanted, what their life would look like. And with every conversation, every steady promise, every act of choosing her, Maggie felt the chains of her past loosening. But trauma doesn't release its grip easily. As the relationship deepened, as Tom started talking about engagement, as the Sullivan family continued folding Maggie into their circle, her old fears began whispering louder. You don't deserve this. This can't be real. They're going to leave. Everyone always leaves. And then came the moment that nearly broke everything. So here's the question that will determine the rest of Maggie's life. When the woman who's spent 29 years believing she's unworthy finally has the chance at the family she's always wanted. Will her past destroy her future before it even begins? It happened 1 week before Christmas, in the most ordinary way that devastating moments often do. Maggie was at St. Patrick's Church helping decorate for the Christmas Eve service when she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. She was behind the altar arranging poinsettias when 2 parish members walked past, their voices carrying in the empty sanctuary. "I think it's wonderful what Mary Sullivan is doing," one woman said, taking in that poor foster girl. "It's very charitable of the family." Maggie's hands froze on the flowers. Poor foster girl. Charitable. The words hit her like physical blows, confirming every fear she'd been fighting for months. She didn't stay to hear Mary's response. Didn't hear Mary's firm voice. Say she's not charity, she's family, and I won't hear otherwise. No. Maggie only heard those 2 words that had defined her entire existence. Charity case. She left the church without telling anyone, drove home in a fog, and within an hour had a suitcase open on her bed. Because this was what Maggie knew how to do. Run before you're rejected. Leave before you're left. Protect yourself before anyone can hurt you again. The pattern was so familiar it was almost comforting. Pack your things. Disappear quietly. Don't make a scene. Don't ask for explanations. Just go. You've done this before. You can do it again. Except this time was different, wasn't it? This time, she wasn't leaving a foster home that never wanted her in the first place. This time, she was leaving Tom. This time, she was leaving the Sullivans. This time, she was leaving the only family she'd ever known. But that voice in her head, the one shaped by 29 years of abandonment, whispered relentlessly, "They never really wanted you anyway. They just felt sorry for you. You were always temporary. You were always the charity case." Tom showed up 40 minutes later because Mary had called him, worried, when Maggie left without explanation. He walked into her apartment without knocking. She'd given him a key months ago, back when she thought maybe she could trust this, and found Maggie sitting on her bed surrounded by half-packed belongings, her face streaked with tears. "Maggie," he said quietly, "what's wrong?" She couldn't look at him. "I'm leaving. This was a mistake. I don't belong here." Tom closed the door slowly, carefully, like he was approaching something fragile that might shatter. What happened? What changed? Everything. Maggie wanted to scream. Nothing. "I finally heard the truth I've known all along." "I heard someone at church," she said, her voice flat. "They called me your mother's charity case. And they're right. That's all I am." Tom's expression shifted to something between anger and heartbreak. "Maggie," but she cut him off because once the dam broke, everything came flooding out. "I spent 29 years being unwanted, Tom, being temporary, being the one people felt sorry for. And I tried so hard to believe this was different. But it's not. I'm still just the foster kid. Everyone feels obligated to be nice to. Your mother is kind. Your whole family is kind. But kind isn't the same as wanting, and I can't keep pretending that people who feel sorry for me actually want me." The words hung in the small apartment like smoke, poisonous and choking. Tom stood there for a long moment, just looking at her, and Maggie waited for him to agree, to admit she was right, to let her go. Instead, he said something she didn't expect. "Are you done?" Maggie blinked. "What?" "Are you done?" Tom repeated, his voice still gentle but with an edge of steel underneath. "Are you done telling me what my family feels, what I feel? Because I'd like a turn to speak now." He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his, even though she tried to pull away. "Maggie, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. My mother doesn't feel sorry for you. She loves you. My father loves you. My siblings love you. I love you. Not because we have to, not out of obligation, not because we're good, Christians doing our duty, but because you're you, because you're kind and strong, and you've survived things that would break most people. Because when you smile, really smile, it lights up the whole room. Because you matter. To us. To me." Maggie shook her head, trying to reject the words even as they sank into the wounded places in her heart. "You can say that. Now, but what?" Tom interrupted. "But you're waiting for me to prove you right? You're waiting for us to reject you so you can say, 'See, I knew it all along.' Is that what this is?" The truth of his words hit Maggie like a slap. That was exactly what she was doing. sabotaging the relationship before it could sabotage her, leaving before she could be left, rejecting them before they could reject her. It was the only survival mechanism she'd ever known. Tom's voice softened. "Maggie, here's the thing. You have to choose to believe it. I can tell you every day for the rest of my life that you're wanted, that you're loved, that you belong. But if you won't let yourself believe it, if you keep one foot out the door, if you keep waiting for us to prove you right that you're not worth keeping, then we'll both be miserable. So you have to decide, are you going to let fear win? Or are you going to let love in?" The question hung between them, and Maggie realized this was the moment that would define the rest of her life. She could keep running, keep protecting herself, keep living in the safety of isolation, or she could do the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. She could stay. She could choose to believe. She could let herself be loved. "I don't want to run anymore," Maggie whispered, the words barely audible. "I don't want to be alone anymore. I want this. I want you. I want your family. I want to believe I'm worth keeping." Tom pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd learned to cry in foster homes where emotions were inconvenient, but deep, wrenching sobs for all the years she'd spent alone, unwanted, unchosen. And Tom just held her, steady and sure, whispering, "I've got you, I've got you. I'm not going anywhere until the storm passed." When Maggie finally pulled back, exhausted and raw, Tom cupped her face in his hands. "Will you come to Christmas Eve tomorrow? With me? With our family? Our family?" The words made Maggie's breath catch. "Yes," she said. "I'll come." Christmas Eve at the Sullivan house was everything chaotic and wonderful that Maggie was learning to expect. 35 people crammed into every available space, children running wild, adults laughing, the smell of ham and cookies filling the air. But this time, when Maggie walked in, Mary pulled her aside immediately. "Maggie, sweetheart, Tom told me what you heard at church. I need you to understand something." Mary's hands gripped Maggie's shoulders, her eyes fierce with maternal protection. "You are not charity. You are my daughter. I chose you, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because I see who you are, and I love her. Do you understand me?" Maggie nodded, tears already starting. "I'm trying to." Mary's expression softened. "Then keep trying, and we'll keep showing you until you believe it." She pulled out a wrapped gift and pressed it into Maggie's hands. "This is for you. Open it now." Inside was a framed photograph from Thanksgiving. The entire Sullivan family gathered around the tables, and there in the middle was Maggie, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. Engraved at the bottom were the words, "The Sullivan Family, Thanksgiving 1995. Maggie was in the photo. Not separate, not apart, but woven into the family portrait like she'd always been there. "You're not a guest here, Maggie," Frank Sullivan said, appearing beside his wife. "You're family. And we wanted you to have proof." The entire family gathered around, siblings, spouses, children, extended relatives, and they embraced Maggie in a group hug that felt like being wrapped in warmth and acceptance and belonging. And this time, Maggie didn't pull away. This time, she let herself be loved. The proposal came on New Year's Eve, under a sky full of stars, in the small park where Tom and Maggie had walked together dozens of times. They'd just left midnight mass, and instead of driving Maggie home, Tom parked at the park and said, "Walk with me?" They sat on their usual bench, and Tom took both her hands in his. "I was going to wait until spring," he said, "but I can't wait any more." He slid off the bench and onto one knee, and Maggie's heart stopped. "Margaret Catherine, for 29 years you spent your life being temporary, being passed over, being told, through actions if not words, that you weren't worth keeping. But you were wrong. You are worth keeping. You're worth choosing. You're worth loving, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." He pulled out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be your family? Will you let my family be your family? Will you let me choose you every single day for the rest of our lives?" Maggie was sobbing too hard to speak, so she just nodded frantically, and Tom laughed as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the streetlight like a promise. "You're not temporary anymore, Maggie," he whispered, pulling her close. "You're mine. forever. The wedding 6 months later was everything Maggie had never dared to dream about. Mary took her dress shopping, crying in the bridal boutique when Maggie found the perfect gown. The parish hall was decorated with white flowers and candles, but the moment that broke Maggie completely was when Frank Sullivan approached her the week before the wedding and said, "I know I'm not your father, but if you'd allow me, I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle." Maggie had cried so much over the past year that she thought she had no tears left, but somehow she found more. "I'd be honored," she whispered. On her wedding day, as Frank walked her down the aisle of St. Patrick's Church, he leaned close and said, "You spent your whole life being unwanted. But that's over now. You're a Sullivan now. And Sullivans don't leave their own. You're ours, forever." Maggie could barely see Tom through her tears, but when she reached the altar and he took her hands, she saw his face wet with emotion too. During their vows, Maggie's voice shook but held strong. "Tom, I spent 29 years believing I was unworthy of love, that I was temporary, that no one would ever choose me. You proved me wrong. You didn't just choose me. You and your family welcomed me, claimed me, and loved me when I didn't know how to love myself. I spent my whole life looking for a home, and I found it in you." Tom's vows were simple and devastating. "Maggie, you are not temporary. You are not unwanted. You are chosen. By me, by my family, by God. You are exactly where you're supposed to be, right here, with us, forever. I promise to remind you every single day that you are loved, you are wanted, and you belong." When Father Murphy pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause, and Maggie realized every pew was full. Sullivan family, parish community, all there to witness her being chosen. At the reception, Mary stood to give a toast that would stay with Maggie forever. For those who don't know, Maggie grew up in foster care. She spent her childhood being moved from place to place, never chosen, never kept. But God had a plan. He brought her to our church, to our family, and to our son. Today, she's not just Tom's wife, she's my daughter. She's a Sullivan, and Sullivans take care of their own. To Maggie, the daughter we got to choose. Welcome home, sweetheart. 20 years later, Maggie stands in her kitchen during Christmas Eve, watching her own children, Catherine, 18, Emily, 28, and adopted from foster care, just like Maggie had been, and Michael, 15, laugh with their cousins while Tom carves the turkey. The Sullivan family still gathers every Sunday at Frank and Mary's house, though Frank and Mary are in their 80s now, moving slower but still the heart of everything. Maggie's daughter Catherine asks about her mother's past, and Maggie tells her the truth. "I spent 29 years being unwanted. But your father and this family chose me when I thought I was unchosen. They gave me something I never had, a home." And when Maggie looks around at her family, her husband, her children, her parents-in-law, her siblings-in-law, all the nieces and nephews and now grandchildren, she realizes she finally has what she spent her whole life wanting: to be chosen, to be wanted, to belong. She's not the foster kid anymore. She's not temporary. She's not charity. She's Mrs. Thomas Sullivan. She's a mother. She's a daughter. She's a sister. She's a grandmother. She is loved. She is wanted. She is home. Because here's what Maggie finally learned after 29 years of believing otherwise. Being unwanted in your past doesn't mean you're unwantable in your future. Family is about who chooses you, not just who shares your blood. It's never too late to find where you belong. And real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that heals, the kind that changes everything, doesn't give up just because you're scared. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt unwanted or temporary in your own life? Have you found your Sullivan family, the people who chose you when you didn't think you were worth choosing? Drop a comment below and share your story, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to believe that they're worth loving too. And if this story touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel for more real stories about love, redemption, and second chances, and share this video with someone who needs to remember that being unchosen in your past doesn't mean you're unchosen forever. Your person, your family, your home, they're out there waiting for you to believe you're worth finding them.